Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the Driving Office 365 Adoption webinar. Today, as you know, this is the focus of today's webinar, and hopefully this will give you a good framework for not only the adoption of Office 365 or any component of Office 365, but it'll also be a handy framework for really any technology that you're trying to drive adoption with your end user base. So before we get started though, just a couple of logistics for everyone on the call today. You should, if you'd like to ask questions, feel free to, in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, you should see a button that allows you to enable that ability to type in a question. What we'll do is we'll try to answer those questions during the webinar as we go. And if I can't get to them during the webinar, we'll have a nice Q&A at the very end of this session today. So we'll probably have 5 to 10 minutes or so at the end of this session that you should be able to get to any questions you might have. So with all of that said, why don't we get started? My name is Brendan Neary, and I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Xelleration. And just to give you a nice overview of Xelleration, let me tell you a little bit about Xelleration and who we are. So give you some insight into our ability and our knowledge around adoption of technology. So Xelleration is a Microsoft consulting partner. We're a managed gold certified partner, founded in the year 2000, so we've been around for a while. We're headquartered in Irvine with offices in the Middle East, Pakistan, and Dubai as well. So we've got a global footprint and definitely helping other companies throughout Southern California and even the globe migrate to and adopt Microsoft technologies. As you see here, our solution set focuses on a wide range of the Microsoft technology set: Office 365, Microsoft Azure, Skype for Business, SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, Exchange, Yammer, and of course the Lotus Notes and Domino, which is not a Microsoft component, but it's definitely a technology that we can support and help companies as they move off of that platform and into the Microsoft world. Our services generally range mostly around consulting, so we see a lot of migrations from old platforms, as I mentioned with Lotus Notes, to others, migrations from old versions to new versions. Deployments, we do quite a bit of application development and application migration, primarily in C# and .NET. We're very familiar with enterprise processes, so change management and the full ITIL suite of processes and procedures. And as you can see here, user training, which we'll talk later today, is a big part of adoption. And then from staff augmentation to full managed support, we provide services there as well. And on the far right of the screen, you can see we've got competencies at the gold level, which is the highest level you can have as a Microsoft partner, in a pretty wide range of the Microsoft technology set. So that's something that we're pretty proud of and definitely wanted to highlight on this call today. So as we move along, let's talk about our agenda today. We're going to go over 4 key areas. The first area we're going to talk about is really the history of end user adoption. And I think it's worth talking about that a little bit because certainly the adoption of Office 365, while that's the focus of today, adopting technology has been a critical component of any technology implementation. So we're going to talk about that briefly. Then we're going to get into an actual framework, an adoption framework that hopefully, like I mentioned earlier, is something that you can leverage not just for Office 365, but also for any other technology you might be looking to have your end user community adopt. And then we're going to get into what do you need to do to be successful pre-implementation, and what do you need to do to be successful post-implementation. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So with all of that said, let's jump right into our first topic of the day. And that first topic is specifically around why is adoption becoming so important? So as you look at this slide, you can see clearly the old model of purchasing technology was very much one of buying equipment and deploying it. And really, the use of the technology by end users wasn't as important to the vendors out in the community, like Digital back in the 60s, and then, of course, Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, other companies in the 80s. Of course, adopting the technology is important, but here's why today it's such a bigger deal for these technology companies. As you look to the right side of the screen, you'll see today, now as technology becomes more of a utility, and you're really just paying for what you need. So as you're moving servers and applications into Azure and other cloud platforms, as you're doing that, as you know, just like with a light switch, right? You don't pay for electricity unless the lights are on. Well, now these vendors, they're not deriving revenue unless your end users are consuming these applications. And that is really the heart of adoption. If end users are not adopting technology, these vendors are not driving revenue. So more than ever, the idea of adoption is going to be a much bigger deal for these technology vendors. And that's why you're seeing even companies like Xelleration today and putting on a webinar like this. You probably wouldn't have seen us do a webinar like this 3, 4, 5 years ago. But today it's become such a bigger part of any technology implementation and important to these software vendors that you're going to see a lot more support coming from these vendors and a lot more interest making sure that end users are happy with and engaged in leveraging these technologies. So again, I wanted to highlight that briefly. Certainly many of us know adoption being so important with many big applications in the environment like big ERP systems, SAP, JD Edwards, Oracle, and others, Microsoft Dynamics. Many of those applications and those rollouts and deployments have failed because adoption wasn't very well handled from a planning and implementation perspective. So all of that said, let's jump into this framework. So what is it that you need to be successful? And as you can see, there are 4 main things that you really want to think about as you go through this process. The first, of course, being got to define a vision and identify some of those key business scenarios. So that's important. If you don't have that vision, it's going to be really hard to drive this adoption. Once you move from really having that vision and key business scenarios and use cases nailed down, then it's time to really prioritize those solutions. So what specific technologies are going to help support that vision and those use cases that you created? And then, of course, you got to build that adoption plan itself. So what are the specific tasks to help end users be a part of the process, not only pre, but post-implementation? And then as you move into the next phase, you're going to want to make sure you've got resources committed and, of course, able and capable of executing that adoption plan. And then you wrap up with really measurement and sharing success and iteration, right? Because a lot of this adoption, it doesn't end with them just using those applications, but it's a continual process of end users looking for ways to leverage these technologies to be more effective in the jobs that they perform on a day-to-day basis. So again, this is the framework we're going to go over today, and we're going to dig in each of these in turn. So let's start with the first one here with defining that vision and identifying business scenarios. So what's the point? Why do you even need to set a vision? Why do you even care about that? And here's the thing, without a vision, it's going to be really hard for all employees, from the top of the food chain all the way down to the bottom, to really understand the value of what these tools or technologies are going to bring to not only the organization as a whole, but also each individual and the departments that they work within. And again, that vision is going to really nail in and get their buy-in and support for the entire process. So it's important to set a vision. So let's talk about now the process of building that vision. And the first step is you got to figure out who's going to be participating in creating that vision. Who should participate in the discussion? And there's really 4 key individuals. You've got certainly the executives and leadership within the organization. Then you've got project managers. Those are certainly the individuals that are going to support this process on a day-to-day basis and make sure that all the tasks and responsibilities that you've laid out in this adoption plan get executed. Because let's not forget, this adoption of the technology you're rolling out is competing with lots of other projects and priorities that are in your end users' lives. And so these project managers are going to have to juggle and manage around these things that pop up and may create delays and adjustments. So without a project manager, you really run a high risk of an adoption plan going awry. Obviously, you need the IT team to support the whole process from not just building these technology solutions, but supporting them, adapting them over time as end users provide feedback and input. And then last but not least, very important to identify champions. Ideally, champions within different business units and different departments, individuals that, again, have that energy and excitement that can drive and help drive the end user adoption as you move things forward. We'll talk about each of these in just a moment here. But let's get back though to the idea of a vision statement, right? And so when we say define a vision, I really do mean you're going to define a real statement, an actual language that you're going to come up with as a team to define. And in the case of Office 365, as you see in the dark orange section of this slide, you can see there are 4 different ideas that you could leverage as a part of your vision statement, particularly with Office 365. And certainly these check marks too. So as you can see here, you want to utilize to provide a community for the team to And again, we'll go through a couple of these in turn. The first one, collaborate seamlessly on projects. You might want to reduce the duplication of work through better access to resources. You might want to harness the knowledge and power of the collective group. Certainly staying abreast of changes occurring throughout the team is important, and so forth. So these are, again, some examples that will give you some ideas of when we're building vision statements, be very specific on what is the goal, what is the business vision that you're trying to accomplish. So why do we identify business scenarios? Okay. Now that we've identified a vision, now it's time to nail down specific business scenarios and use cases that'll help you really align the company's trying to accomplish these objectives, these goals, or this vision. What are the specific business scenarios that your end users go through on a day in, day out basis? So again, in terms of defining those business scenarios, these are the targeted goals that each team or individual needs to accomplish to do their job effectively, okay? And as you can see here, as you identify those scenarios, a couple of best practices you want to keep thinking about. Make sure that these business scenarios tie into some existing initiatives that the company is trying to accomplish. That will really help ensure that the technology you're trying to get adopted is aligned with things that people are actually doing and actually care about. And then, of course, certainly define clear scenarios, right, which you can certainly measure. Ideally, if you can measure the impact. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So in terms of completing that visioning exercise, here's the best way to do it. You want to host a meeting and get those executives, stakeholders, project managers, champions, get those 4 individuals that we talked about early on, get them in a room and get them to discuss some challenges and issues and things that might be affecting the workflows and some of the work that your end users conduct on that day in, day out basis. But here's some questions that you might ask, and we'll go through a couple of these that we've certainly done with some of our customers as we've helped them roll out Office 365. But for starters, the first question, perhaps the most obvious one, is, how are your employees currently using software to get their work done? And trying to get a sense of the challenges that they experience. So that's bullet 2. And then thirdly, of course, why would you want to change? What would be the benefit? What would be the impact to making these changes and doing things in a different way? So I'm not going to read all of these because we've got a lot to get through today, but as you can see, each of those 8 bullets are some topics and ideas that you can utilize during that visioning exercise as you're hosting that meeting with executives and department stakeholders, PMs, and champions. So let's take a look now at an example of a vision that we helped one of our customers build. So in their mind, they set this company vision. They wanted to be able to transform the way their department connected with each other, working together on tasks or projects, and communication with leadership and streamlining processes for efficiency and clarity. Again, I know that seems fairly general, but remember, this is the vision statement that's going to drive a lot of the specific business scenarios and use cases that will align with these objectives right here in this vision. Let's take a look at one more too. Here's another we help build. We create a safe and open collaboration platform for easy sharing of company data and news between employees to improve efficient execution of our strategies as part of our culture and performance. Again, seems pretty generic, but it's very, very important for many companies that are struggling with issues like this. So now that you've created your vision, now let's talk about identifying business scenarios. So how does it all fit together? And as you can see there, right, at the high level, you've built your business vision or strategy, as you see in the orange bubbles in this slide. But the next step clearly is to build those business scenarios, right? And so remember, the scenarios are those desired outcomes, right? The desired outcomes that each department or individual is looking to accomplish, but it's all aligning with that vision that you've built with those stakeholders that you've defined early on in this process. So again, business scenarios where you want to see specific improvement, and then the solutions are going to be the specific technologies that you're going to leverage in order to support improving those business scenarios that the end users are looking to accomplish. So with that said, why don't we take a look at a few examples of a few business scenarios here. As you look at that first orange bubble to the left side of your screen, you'll see one of the business scenarios was collaborative projects. So in this case, customer base was feeling like their projects were not being very collaborative with all of the members in the project. And so the scenario that they wanted to address was to have better planned events. They wanted to have events that could be planned better, and the goal or the benefit to that was to drive productivity by facilitating cross-geographic and functional team project collaboration. So this is specific, right? This is starting to get very specific on, hey, we've got events and we don't plan them well. We want to do it better. As you move to the right, you'll see that middle bullet, transparent communication. Their objective there, they wanted to conduct more effective meetings. So they want a platform to deliver a consistent message and facilitate two-way communication. Again, you see that hopefully this gives you a sense of the type of scenarios and use cases that you can start to think about as you drill down from that fairly high-level vision and start to get into more specific and tangible impacts to the business. But again, they should all be aligned, hopefully, with one another. So let's jump into perhaps one that's a little more specific. So in the slide we just saw here, you can see the lower left gray bubble, planning better events. Let's take a look at that specific business scenario and talk about what are the factors of planning better events. So see how we're drilling even deeper into what do you mean by planning better events? Well, here's what we mean. We mean communicating and meeting project timelines. That's important to us. Okay, fine. What else? Well, coordinating with presenters is a challenging thing. Great, then let's see how we can do that better. What else? Working with external vendors is an issue. And last but not least, sharing and creating files with team members. So you see how, again, they want to plan events better. Specifically, in what areas do you want to help to plan these better is how they drilled all the way down into this. And then, again, drilling even a bit further, what are the challenges around that? What are the challenges you have around each of those four things that we just discussed? So in the case of communicating and meeting project timelines, the challenge was project team members aren't clear on project milestones and the assigned tasks for each member. So there it is, right? We've gone from high-level vision to business scenarios to specific use cases and challenges around those use cases that end users are articulating and sharing and participating and creating and helping to define. And I'm not going to go through each one of these, but hopefully you get the sense of, as you can see, this is the process that you'll want to go through to really make the vision drive all the way down into tangible impact that the technology you're looking to implement can impact and therefore help you communicate the benefit of why the company is changing and why the end users hopefully need to start leveraging this new technology to improve these very specific things in their world. Move on here. So here's another example. Remember we saw also, what are the factors of conducting effective meetings? In this case, there are three areas where our customer felt like, hey, we could do a better job of taking collaborative notes, tracking action items, and engaging meeting participants. So clearly, right, they sat down and they came up with some areas where they felt like they could improve. So again, I brought this second one up just to give you some more ideas on what you could hopefully look at and potentially consider as you go through this process of defining those scenarios and those specific use cases and the challenges associated with them to drive the value of the technology that you're trying to get adopted by end users. So let's jump into, so defining those scenarios. So again, you saw some examples of what we just looked at as scenarios. Best way to do that is to just, again, host another meeting. And it may be with a small department, it might be with a set of users, power users, whatever it might be. But delve into that and dig into what are those current challenges, what are their strategies, and again, try to identify what are those, how do those things impact their business objectives and challenges that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis that they feel are important for their business. So got another few set of questions that you might use as a part of that process. Again, now you're below the vision, now we're in the scenario world, and you might consider asking questions like, hey, what are some of your challenges or pain points related to communication or collaboration? Second one, what are the main areas in which you'd like to see improvement? Third one, what methods of communication and collaboration are you typically better received? What do you guys like to use? Do you like texting? Do you like email? Do you like phone call? What do you prefer? So again, these are the types of questions that really dig in and get at those specific use cases that end users care about. Because again, the more that's tangible to their world and issues they care about, the more likely they're going to be to adopt the technology. So again, just like we talked about, the people that can really help with those those scenario definition exercise, if you will. Really, it can be any and all of the individuals we've talked about in the past. It can be the executives that are responsible for different departments, divisions. Certainly the PM will be important to be in that part of that process to hear what some of the challenges and help to carry out some of the plan that will support those scenarios after you've defined the solution. Certainly IT, because IT also needs to understand how these scenarios are currently impacting their end users with the technologies they're currently using. And then, of course, champions need to hear this as well. So, the user and the groups that are going to be involved in the scenario development discussion isn't too different from the group that are going to be part of that vision discussion. Might even be a series of meetings with that group, starting with the vision and then leading into more of the business scenarios. So let's talk about the stakeholders and the people that are part of this entire process. We talked about those 4 groups, but I'm going to actually broaden it out just a little bit here, because as you have potentially large organizations or even smaller organizations, you might have many different people playing different roles, and these are some of the different roles that we'll go through here in turn. Smaller organizations, you might have one person that's wearing several hats. They might be responsible for more than one of these roles that you see here. We've talked about a few of these roles already, but there are a few that I think can be a very valuable asset to the technology adoption process. So the first one, like we mentioned, is going to be that project manager. And again, just like I said, can be very critical as you go through this process to make sure that competing deadlines and other objectives don't get in your way, or if they do, you have a plan to get around them. Obviously, you need that executive sponsor or somebody that can really support the investment, not only financially, but in terms of time, and making sure that in terms of prioritizing this entire adoption plan, that it gets prioritized in a way that's going to be successful for the overall objective. Certainly the business owner, right? The people that are in charge of their division, their department, and making sure that they're a part of the process and they're approving and supporting this for their entire team. We mentioned the champions as well, and certainly they're going to be important because they're going to bring that energy to help drive a lot of this adoption as well. Then you've got your department leads. You've got an educational lead as well. This is important too, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but education and making sure that the end user team and communities have enough knowledge to really effectively leverage and utilize this new technology that they need to adopt, that's going to be super important. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. Certainly we talked about the IT specialist and the IT team that's involved with supporting not just the building of the solution, but supporting it once it's been built and rolled into production. Then you've got an HR manager. An HR manager specifically around Office 365 can be a very important role to be participating in this process, because so much of what goes through the Office 365 platform in particular ends up being, and potentially, HR related, not just in terms of the content and documentation, but also in terms of governance and communication and what your organization considers acceptable methods of communicating, because a lot of these end up being HR related potential issues. Certainly the communication lead. So as we'll see in a little bit, communicating this entire process out across the organization, both pre and post launch, is a key role. Then you'll have a community manager. So this is a person who can actually help manage the Yammer network. And Yammer being a technology within the Office 365 framework, for those that are not familiar, Yammer is a piece of that solution that can really help provide that guidance and even best practices and communication across the teamwork as you go through this launch or adoption process. And then last but not least, SharePoint Site Manager. And that's certainly another piece of the Office 365 platform. And again, should you choose to implement that piece of the technology, be very important to have a manager who can support and be part of this process, because with SharePoint being very, very focused on collaboration and supporting the end users, you'll definitely want to make sure that SharePoint Site Manager is involved in this process to make sure that that individual is really clear on how SharePoint is being built and evolved to support those end user business scenarios, use cases, and ultimately solving the challenges. So at a high level, these are all the individuals that are part of the process, and I've kind of covered them all pretty well. So what we'll do is we'll just do this. We're going to hit each one, but very briefly, as I just want to kind of focus on really something that might help everyone on the call, and that is how much time are these individuals going to be investing in this process, both pre-launch and post-launch. And then we'll also take a quick look to just a high-level summary. So as you see at the summary here, a PM, like I mentioned, they're going to oversee the entire rollout, both pre and post-launch, and making sure everything's being executed successfully. As you can see, though, this individual is going to spend quite a bit of time in the pre-launch. They're really going to be spending a lot of time making sure everything is on track, moving, training is taking place, and then certainly post-launch, they've got to be involved in this process as well. Perhaps not quite as much as pre-launch, but certainly still involved to make sure the adoption is going smoothly. Like we mentioned, the executive sponsor, not quite as much time as that project manager, but certainly playing a key role, obviously making sure that the solution, in this case Office 365, is being championed across the organization. And this is important because this is the individual that's really going to make sure that investment, like I mentioned, in both money and time with everybody is properly prioritized and everybody gets it. So we've talked about this individual. Let's move on and talk about the business owner. So again, this individual about as much time as the executive sponsor, but also this person also providing a lot of guidance and approval throughout the entire rollout process. So that's the role of the business owner. We'll talk about champions. We've talked about them a bit. They're spending a bit more time, and as you can see, this is a person who, I'll jump down into qualification section because I think it's important when you talk about a champion that it's really clear that champions they've got to be enthusiastic, they've got to be forward thinking and pretty eager to really kind of seeing that this rollout is successful for everyone involved. But they've got to have a strong understanding and knowledge of not just the technology, but also the way the different departments and individuals work and operate as a team. So they're going to be extremely important to the process. As I mentioned here, you can see, I don't mean to overemphasize, but they are such an important part that they're really going to reduce the strain on a lot of the project team members here to help drive that engagement. And here are 5 things that they can really help to do. So they're going to create that groundswell and enthusiasm to get that adoption improved in lots of different ways. And here's the thing. When your end users are going through stress and they're trying to get a project done and on time and they're under stress, their natural reaction is going to be to revert back to the old way of doing the way they do it, because that's what they know. That's what they're familiar with. That's what they've always done, and they can count on that old way working. So as they go through this process of change, it's going to be stressful. And having a champion that's there to support them and be a part of the process, it's just going to be a big support system to help them get over that hump of when they're at work, they're trying to get home, but something crashes, it doesn't work, and they've got to figure out a way to get it done quickly. Champions are going to be really supportive of this process. So let's move on to departmental leads, and we've talked about them a little bit as well. Much like a business owner, a departmental lead is going to be really supportive to their specific department and team to make sure that their team is supported in the way that they need throughout the process. So that it's very important that you've got departmental leads involved in this process. Like we mentioned, the IT specialist, again, they're obviously overseeing these technical aspects of the integration points and integrating within a lot of the existing business applications that the end users are currently using, and should have plenty of authority to make some high-level IT decisions. So again, very important role. The HR manager, like we talked about, again, a lot of the processes that you're going to build and governance that you put in place for a lot of the components of Office 365 are definitely going to have to be run through HR in many cases. But again, not a tremendous amount of time commitment for the HR manager. A couple hours a week pre, an hour post-launch, really. So let's take a look now at the communication lead. Now, take a look at the summary of this person's role. This is the person that's going to be developing, approving, and delivering all of the company-wide communication related to the rollout. And we're going to get a little bit deeper in just a minute into the different types of rollout ideas that you can use as a part of this process. But that's what this person's role is. And as you can see, very involved pre-launch, even post-launch, some time spent there as well. And then, as I mentioned a bit ago, Yammer, an important tool. You can see quite a bit of time for the Yammer community manager, and that's only because the Yammer environment really can be a tremendous asset in the process of making sure communication between all end users is facilitated and driven. But this person is managing that day-to-day network activity and helping the project manager with the rollout strategy. So important role, valuable person in the process. And like I mentioned, in the SharePoint side of things, this SharePoint site manager is going to manage that day-to-day activity and just help make sure that the project manager also has support during that rollout strategy. Again, as I mentioned, the SharePoint site manager, key role, making sure the SharePoint environment supports exactly the requirements of the end user community. We've gone through the first section here. We've gone through the vision, identity, or identifying business scenarios, and even the team associated with this process. So I've been doing a lot of talking. Just want to make sure everybody's okay, and if there are any questions that I can answer, feel free to type in any questions. So looks like at the moment we have no questions, so we'll keep on and we'll jump right into the next section here. Let's jump into now prioritizing and creating that adoption plan. So here's the thing, in terms of defining the actual solution that's going to impact those business scenarios and use cases and even the challenges that you've defined earlier with your team, you want to start small and make sure that it's nice and simple. So you don't want to overwhelm people. You don't want to try to boil the ocean and try to accomplish too much, because what will happen is it'll take forever to actually build that solution. And by the time you actually roll something out, your end users will have moved well past those problems, and in some cases may have found solutions on their own to get around those problems. So you want to try to find that low-hanging fruit to begin with, so you can get the team identified and roll that pilot out and get them moving forward. So in terms of defining the solution, you definitely want to make sure that the end user community is right at the dead center of the experience. So you've got to focus on their experience, and it's critical that they have ownership of the solution. So that means you're going to have to engage them. And as you can see, you're going to want to ask them about areas for improvement, kind of like you did with the business scenario process. So here's a great way to think of having end users engage in the process. And if you ask 4 simple questions or try to get them to create 4 components of how their job could be better, here's how you want to try to frame this discussion. So when you're talking with stakeholders, champions, and again, trying to establish these business objectives, frame it like this. Say, as a, whatever the person's role is, I want to, whatever action they need to take so that I can do what, which means you need what. And I'm going to show you some examples of that, okay? So let's take a look at right here. This is some example of a few customers of ours that we've worked with. And as you can see, remember we had earlier in our discussion here, we had the idea of how do we conduct more effective meetings. So look at column left, the leftmost column. You can see that we've got 4 different types of participants in meetings. You've got a meeting participant, meeting leaders, department leader, and project managers. So let's take a look at just a couple of these. As you can see, right, you talk with a meeting participant and say, all right, so as a meeting participant, what do you want to do? Well, I want to have a single, easily editable note capturing meeting minutes. Perfect, that's very specific. Well, why do you need that? So that I don't waste time adding notes that were already captured and can easily locate the minutes if I miss a meeting. Perfect, that makes total sense. Now, in order to facilitate that, what do you need? Well, I need to be able to co-edit the note during the meeting. I need an easy way to edit or comment afterwards. And I need an easy way to share the link to someone else. Perfect. Okay, so what's the value of being able to do that? Well, it's going to save the person time. It's going to facilitate onboarding of other employees that might have missed the meeting and improve information sharing. So do you see how you can really force the end user to get engaged with, you have a very specific need that's a part of this specific issue or business scenario, which is conducting effective meetings. Let's take a look at just one more. Meeting leaders. What meeting leaders wanted to do in this case was they wanted to give access to meeting presentation and other shared documentation. Makes sense? Why do you need to do that? So that all participants can access relevant presented items and easily locate them after the meeting. Makes total sense. So what does that mean you need? I need the latest versions of the presentations and documents accessible online to everyone, and to add links to the notes. Perfect. And then you can see clearly to the right, what's the value of doing that? Time saving, improved information sharing, and up-to-date information. Similar to a couple of those above, but hopefully this gives you a sense of how to engage specific individuals in the process of participating in what is it that they need, why do you need it, and let's start to think about specifically what we could put in your hands to facilitate that issue. So I'm not going to go through department leader or project manager because, again, I've got a few more things to get through and not enough time. But hopefully this gives some insight into how you can integrate and talk with end users to really build direct involvement with the solution that you're going to implement. So again, here we are back here. Now it's time to take a look at how do you identify specific features that will align with specific technology. And in this case, right, we're talking about Office 365. So again, our challenge here is to get updates. Timing is everything. Let's not do that now. All right. So now, like I said, as far as this specific business scenario of conducting effective meetings, if you look at the row just above that orange line, you see the capabilities that Office 365 brings to the table are Yammer, Skype for Business, SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, Office, and Outlook, right? All of those technologies are the capabilities or solutions, if you will. Now, which of those facilitate taking collaborative notes, tracking action items, and engaging meeting participants? And you can see Yammer touches all of those bases. Skype for Business, 2 of them. SharePoint, 3. OneDrive for Business, 2. And same for Office and Outlook. So see how now you're taking specific solutions, in this case Office 365 components, and aligning them to very specific issues that your end users have verbally shared and said are issues we need help with. So let's move on now to, let's even dig deeper. So how does Yammer actually help taking collaborative notes, tracking action items, engaging meeting participants? And there it is. You can see you can use Yammer Notes for outlining and organizing meeting agendas. Let's take a look at SharePoint. What does SharePoint do for taking collaborative notes? Well, you can host documents and notebooks shared during recurring meetings. Perfect. That achieves the objective that our meeting hosts were hoping to have, or presenters, I should say. Then in terms of tracking action items, how does SharePoint help? Well, it helps with tasks can be used to assign actions to people with easy follow-up and task center for the team members. And of course, engaging the meeting participants, how does SharePoint help there? Well, you can easily share documents live with other participants. So now you've not only gone to the point of, hey, what technologies can impact these things, but how do they do it? Now you've really gotten down to the nth degree of exactly how do these technologies that you've selected and looked at solve the business problem that the end users have articulated themselves. Now comes the task of really prioritizing those solutions. So again, like I mentioned earlier, it's important to make sure that you don't try to overdo, but start small and try to demonstrate really quick value so you don't overwhelm the teams. But again, the key thing is how complex or difficult, right? So that's going to be one aspect to the prioritization process. Certainly the amount of value that that solution brings is another dimension that you want to consider in terms of prioritizing. Obviously the impact, which is kind of similar to adding value, right? And then of course, last but not least, is the leadership involvement. So kind of important to make sure you know how much leadership support you're going to get with each of those solutions and business scenarios that you're trying to impact. But let me show you now, here's how you can even take each one of those solutions and determine. In the case of Yammer or SharePoint or whatever the solution is that you're trying to implement, you can literally rank it from a score of 1 to 5. So how much value, how complex, how much impact, how much leadership involvement. And as you can see, right, in solution 1, not a tremendous score there, but it looks like solution 3 is huge, right? It's got a 5 for added value. Looks like complexity also though is up there. Impact's pretty high and leadership involvement's pretty high. So you can use your own scale and create your own scale for what's important for your organization. But hopefully this gives you kind of an idea of how you might go about prioritizing some of the different solutions that you're looking at leveraging as a part of the Office 365 platform. So in terms of defining success criteria, now let's talk about success, right? Because we've gone through the process of going all the way from the top, from a vision to business scenarios, down to use cases, engaging the users in determining what the challenges are that they have, and then we've started to identify a specific technology solution that aligns to those, and we've started to prioritize those. Now it's time to figure out, okay, now we've got to make sure that we're going to be able to define success. Because we've got our alignment, that's good. But again, now that we're here, you've got to make sure that success criteria you come up with, you'll want to make sure that you know what you're measuring and how you're going to go about collecting both not just quantitative numbers, but also qualitative data. So both of those things are going to be important. So you'll want to be smart about it, as you can see the cute little acronym here. But again, specific, make sure you can measure. Obviously, try to set attainable goals. Certainly make sure that those goals and the things you're measuring are relevant, that people actually care about it, and that it's timely, that it makes sense. So let's take a look at a couple of examples here. So as we go past the success criteria, let's take a look at what would an adoption plan potentially even look like. And here's how you're going to want to lay it out, much like you would in a Gantt chart. You can see that you're going to have pre-launch phase activities, and you can also have post-launch phase activities. But the way we like to build these adoption plans is we like to lay out over weeks at a time and certainly define the different swim lanes that each of the different individuals that are part of this process need to be involved with. And again, this is just, I'm not going to go through each person's role and responsibility, but you can see that they clearly have specific objectives and goals and tasks that they're responsible for during each week of the process. And clearly, in some cases, there's less to do during some weeks, and some weeks there's quite a bit to do. But again, this is how we like to structure that adoption plan, again, from pre-launch to even post-launch, because again, a lot of people think, oh, okay, once it's launched, we're done. Lots of work, as you can see, to the right side of this project plan. So let's now move down into the third pillar here that we see. Let's talk about the resources and executing that adoption plan. So what's involved with the execution process? So first of all, it's really important to drive awareness and excitement, right? And like we talked about, if people understand how this solution is going to impact them, they're going to be way more motivated to really learn and adopt, like we're talking about here. So you've got to show people what's in it for them. Obviously, they need to understand the goals and milestones. And, again, the message that you deliver to each of the different user groups may be different depending on what department, what level within the department. There's a lot of things to consider as you think about that communication plan. So there are a variety of tactics that you're going to want to think about. You'll want to think about certainly the different communications that could consist of internal announcements like newsletters, and those can be effective because those come out on a regular basis, hopefully, and people can expect to see those. And again, that'll help to generate a little bit of excitement and a little bit of buzz. Events are a great way to drive interest and excitement, like parties, town halls, contests, giveaways, lunch and learns are other things that you can do, certainly to help people get awareness. But again, it creates that awareness and excitement that it's not just an individual that's making the change, but that the company is involved in this process. It's not just a one person doing this. And then, of course, last but not least is the training process. And that's certainly critical and always critical with any new technology or change. But again, you've got so many options for training available in today's world, from classroom style to self-starting guides. And as I mentioned, you're really going to see a lot of these technology vendors starting to provide more tools to support the adoption process. Because as I mentioned, if your end users are not using this technology, then these technology vendors are not deriving revenue anymore. It's changing. It's a changing world. So you're going to see a lot more support for these training tools. Again, like I mentioned, a lot of other things you can consider with regard to driving awareness and communications. You can create posters and flyers. We've done several of those, as you can see. Certainly, you could even have like a countdown. So email communication that's sort of sending to let people know, 2 weeks to the countdown, 1 week, 2 days, 1 day, and really get people focused and aware of the change that's coming. A couple of other things you can think about. You could also think about, having some videos playing somewhere in the background, maybe in different areas of the office, in common use areas, in cafeterias and break rooms, things of that nature, just to kind of get people, again, familiar with, hey, this is a change the company is making, so I'm a part of it, and get them a little more excited. Like I mentioned, lunch and learn sessions, also something you can do to help get people excited. Definitely want to get those champions involved with these processes, because those are the people that the end users that are not champions may look to lean on a little bit for support, especially when they're a little stressed out or looking for help in the process. Like I mentioned, end user training, very important. So again, lots of different forums you can leverage, especially with people in different geographic locations. So again, think about comprehensive training plan to really leverage a few different medium to support potential challenges there. But again, some of the key things you want to think about is who are you training? What's their role, like I mentioned? Where do they perform a lot of their tasks? Are they on mobile? Are they on workstations? And even when? When are they performing these tasks, right? So again, these may be issues that may impact the type of training you want to set up for them. So let's now jump into, and one more thing. The key part of the end user training, one more aspect, is definitely why the training. So as we talked about earlier, as you're going through the training process, and again, you don't want the training just to focus on how to use the technology, but it's got to also focus on why the change is impacting, what's in it for them, and why they're being asked to change. Because remember, if you'll think back to your psychology class in college, the one thing that creates stress for human beings is change. Change is what causes stress. So no matter how happy they are about doing things better, it's still stressful. So they gotta understand why it's going to benefit them. And again, as you see here, as a key part of that plan, gotta impact those benefits. So again, just want to kind of hit those highlights there. Let's talk about also the ongoing usage and support. Certainly you can do some nice tips and tricks emails to kind of help people stay even after the launch. Keep them aware of some of the things that they can do with the technology that they may not yet be doing. So again, it's that evolution of how they use the technology over time. And then also, you can also leverage some of these product and scenario-based training tools at the Office Training Center. Microsoft has some really, really good training tools that you can leverage online for Office 365. So there are a couple of other areas you could also leverage. And then certainly you're going to want to make sure you're gathering and capturing ongoing usage and feedback, and obviously the successes. Surveys are a really important thing, and I don't want to underscore the importance of, I want to underscore the importance of surveys, because surveys throughout the entire process are going to really, really help you not only fine-tune the process as you go, but capture that quantitative information about how the adoption and how the technology is impacting the end-user community. And then the success criteria, we'll talk about success criteria in a little bit in more detail, but certainly creating a dashboard to track progress is a great idea and a great way to support this entire process. So let's talk about measuring, sharing success, and then iterating, right? Because once you roll out and you launch Office 365, it's not the end. It's not the end, because your end user community is going to continue to think of ways that their jobs could get better, faster, more effective, and leveraging technology to do that. This is just step one of this solution. So let's take a look. So what do you need to showcase success? And really, it's like we talked about a minute ago. It's going to be a mix of both qualitative and quantitative results. But, before you even get started, it's going to be important to think about, where are you before you get started? So back in the example of running meetings and collaboration during a meeting, it's great to better understand, what specific issues and how often have those occurred. How many meetings does your company or department run in an average week? And try to get a sense for, how big an impact is this solution going to really help and benefit the group. So again, evaluate that benchmark, and you can use surveys to do that for sure. The next thing is you'll want to certainly identify some key performance indicators that you can improve and hopefully improve the outcome of once you've launched and released the new technology. Next, of course, you'll certainly want to start to look at success stories. If you can gather quotes, or even with interviews, you can capture how people are better off, and sharing that out with the community, that's going to also help adoption quite a bit. And then, of course, as you've adopted and you've launched the solution into your environment, over time, you'll be able to measure your progress against those key performance indicators that you've defined early on. from a baseline standpoint. But let's take a look at a couple of success criteria examples here. So we'll just go through a couple here, but if you look at the first one, you see increased adoption, right? Increased usage correlates to user adoption of the technology. So if one of the objectives of this rollout is to make sure end users are leveraging the technology, Office 365 has reports that quantitatively you can measure and learn exactly how much usage is taking place. And you can even do it by department, by individual. So you can really get down to a very nth degree. So even if end users are telling you, hey, we're using it, it's going great, you have actually quantitative data to determine, are you really using it, or are you just telling me that? So that's certainly one way that you can leverage. If you look down to the next option, training effectiveness, how effective was the training, and hopefully the more effective, the more usage you'll see. Certainly you can do not only those reports in Office 365 that'll tell you what the current usage is, but you can also do surveys. You can even leverage Yammer to have people provide feedback on how effective things are going. Again, a number of things here where you can look at, in terms of success, reducing operating costs. You can look at increasing productivity, improving collaboration, even employee satisfaction, some specific success criteria that you can, again, before launch, better understand and try to make sure you've got some understanding of the current environment. So as you go through the launch process, you can actually compare before and after and see how much better off the organization is. So from a measurement framework standpoint, here are a couple of things to keep in mind. Certainly, you definitely want to make sure that the agility the solution brings your organization is one dimension that you can consider. Again, you'll also want to consider financial impacts. So things that can benefit the organization financially, whether that be reduced costs, increased revenue, increased profitability, certainly dimensions that you can consider as you're looking at what to measure. Quality of service is another one. So again, all of these things are things that you're going to want to give some thought to as you go through thinking about what do we want to measure, so that when we're done with this, we can say, hey, we moved the needle in a positive way by investing the time and money to bring this new technology into the environment. So again, I'm not going to jump into a whole lot of detail because we're getting near the top of the hour here. But again, as I mentioned earlier, you're definitely going to be able to do some end user surveys and make sure that the satisfaction level with regard to the technology that's being rolled out is where it needs to be. And again, don't be afraid to do these surveys throughout the entire process, both pre as well as post-launch, because it's going to help you, like I said, fine-tune the rollout if you do it before launch, and for sure after launch, it's going to help give you all of that data and information you need to, again, continue to fine-tune, because you've got to remember launching these technologies and getting that adoption. It's not a one-time thing. It's something that you're going to continue to do over and over. And I've got here for you a little bit of an example of a success story here, where you can see this individual, Dave Hamilton. He's at a packing company, and he had some issues with poor quality. And, as you can see here, right, they're difficult to remove from the pallet. They're not easy to place on the display. We've got bottles rolling all over the place. This isn't making for a great customer experience. So leveraging Yammer, he's able to flag an issue that doesn't come up very often. And very quickly, within hours, members and others from across the country have been able to contribute and say, hey, we're dealing with that too. And even an executive acknowledging the issue, and somebody ultimately chiming in and indicating, hey, we've got the issue solved, just talk to point of contact, and they're concerned about these reports. We've already put some plans in place to rectify the solution. So again, just kind of an example of how you could literally take and copy this and send this out as a part of a success story to share with the rest of the community on how Yammer was able to support a very specific business problem and get it resolved quickly. Last but not least here, iteration is important. Like I mentioned a minute ago, this whole journey doesn't end after launch day. And it certainly doesn't end after you measure that launch impact. It's continuous. And you should be, of course, looking constantly for new ways that Office 365 or any technology that you're launching and rolling out into your business community is demonstrating value and keeping up with the needs of your users. So really kind of starting back at that initial point of understanding and going back periodically to the end user community to find out what is it you guys are trying to do better? What are you guys trying to accomplish that you're not accomplishing today? So iteration is important. And as you can see here, there are a few ideas that you can do. You can host engagements periodically to go back and learn more about what your end users need through brainstorming events. You can engage certainly users and champions to develop new ideas for how Office 365 can improve business practices. So there's a number of things you can do to continually educate and capture and gather information about how your end user community is doing their job and how it could be better. So with all of that, we have about 4 minutes for Q&A. We're at 11:56. So do we have any questions? Let's take a quick look. We'll give the floor a moment or two to type in a question or two. Okay, looks like we have one question here. So here's a question here. The question is, have you run into any roadblocks for adoption? And so great question. The places that you're going to see potential, at least we've seen in our experience, roadblocks for adoption tend to be around conflicting agendas. And again, it's, as I present this and it sounds like a perfect world where you start with creating a vision and you go all the way through to connecting all the dots and it sounds perfect. But the challenge is that people just don't have much time in their jobs, their daily life, and there are going to be competing pressures and priorities. And the biggest challenge you're going to run into is making sure that you get as many end users and even everybody involved in each of the roles, from executive leadership and sponsorship all the way down to the end user community, participating and contributing time. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons that if you don't have that executive sponsorship and even business unit and departmental head sponsorship, if you don't have that sponsorship, you will find that the end users are going to be distracted and sidetracked into doing other activities. And it's not to say that there aren't other activities that may be more important than the specific technology you're rolling out, but at least finding a way to mitigate that issue is definitely something that we see periodically as we run into different tasks and issues there. So, but certainly that's a big one. All right, so let's see if I have any more questions. Here's one. How do you handle a timeline if you're a small shop, 160 users, and they expect one person to handle everything? That's a great question. Really, and we see this a fair amount too, right? It's trying to get more done with fewer resources, right? That's kind of the age-old challenge. I think that almost comes down to a couple of things, right? It's sort of the pillar of, well, how much time, money, and people do you have? And if I can't get people, then you need to be prepared to allow me to take more time, or you need to be prepared to invest more money with leveraging other resources to help with the process. But it's sort of that three-legged stool where if you take away one of those legs on me, the stool's going to fall. And so we have to make it up with one way or another. But I would tell you, that's probably the biggest thing and it can be challenging because I know sometimes you've got ownership and business leadership that doesn't get it, but it's important that they understand that if you just don't have the resources you need, they're going to have to find some way. If it's just one person, they're going to have to give you some flexibility with time or resources that you can bring in outside to help you out. Hopefully that helped answer that question. Any other questions? All right, well, listen, it looks like we're right at the top of the hour, 1 minute shy of 1 hour. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Hopefully that helped give you a framework. And again, if you have any questions or we can support you at Xelleration, this is something that we do on a daily basis, helping companies work on not only planning and implementing technology, but certainly the process of adoption is a big deal. So thank you, everyone, for joining today, and good luck with adopting technology in your organizations.